No, instead of trying not to come, I'm trying not to think, and I can't stop. I mean,
we've all been there, right?
Is this is the breakdown scene? Is this in the prison where this is happening?
Yes. He's been. This is Tom Wilkinson's character and Michael Clayton, and he's recounting his moment of epiphany, which involved a couple redheaded Lithuanian strippers or hookers.
Hooker. I think you would call them a hooker.
Yeah.
Do you think it's natural redhead for Lithuania? I wouldn't really pair those two together. You know.
I think it's
do some
definitely
research.
Yeah. I think it's definitely dyed hair.
All right, we're sending Tommy to a strip club with Lithuanian strippers.
Okay, cool.
You come back with us with some research, all right?
Yeah, I'll take some notes.
Hello, welcome to Film Trace. This is a podcast where we trace the life of a film from conception to production, all the way to its release and reception. We have two special guests today, Tommy and Tim. Why don't you guys introduce yourself and your podcast? Go for it.
Hey guys, we're Tommy and Tim. We're from the Haven't Seen It podcast. You can follow us on Twitter, social media, and everything like that. Our podcast is basically we cover a film that the other person has never watched before. So, for example, this month we're going to be covering The Terminator, which Tim has never seen, and Forrest Gump, which I've never seen somehow. So,
Nice.
Yeah.
Incredible.
They're also very loose rules, too. So we just, if it's a new release or something we want to cover, sure. Okay, whatever. Like, we both haven't seen it. Doesn't matter. So we make it up as we go.
You guys been doing it for how long?
We started about 6 months ago, back in December, with Home Alone 2, to be exact. And it's been fun ever since. We've been loving doing it. So
Awesome. Well, thanks for being on the podcast. This is going to be a good one. So we're continuing our cycle of existential thrillers. We are doing Michael Clayton from 2007, and then the chaser film today is The Hunt from 2012, the Danish film. Chris, let's start out with Michael Clayton. What does it mean to you?
Oh man, this was kind of, along with The Game, which that episode will come out in a little bit, was kind of like a no-brainer for this cycle of films, correct? Mutually,
100%. We had to do it.
It's just it's interesting in that it has become kind of a quintessential 2000s film, but at the time people didn't seem to think much of it, including myself. And I really enjoyed the experience in the movie theater. I saw it when it came out and was like, oh yeah, that's like a really like tightly wound and interesting, like rewatchable suspense film. You know, it's got intrigue, both from like the legal thriller end of things, but it's also kind of beyond that. It's a little more elevated than your standard, you know, Grisham procedural or something like that. Yeah. And it also is like a powerhouse set of performances that wound up surprisingly, I think, even though I would probably also agree it's deserved, Oscar-winning performance from Tilda Swinton in a supporting role. So it's a strange little genre movie that happened to also become something bigger than I think anybody anticipated, including the filmmaker himself, Tony Gilroy. We'll get into where he came up with this idea and some research behind it and our feelings about how it stands, 15 years later, especially with our guests. I know at least one of you guys, Tommy, right, hadn't seen it before this one?
Yeah, this is my first time ever watching this one, so I just had to watch it at work, which was an interesting choice for a work watch. So, like I was saying earlier to you guys, thank God I have headphones, because Tom Wilkinson screaming about like fucking jerking off and everything like that was certainly it was interesting, to say the least.
What kind of workplace do you have? What are you doing? I want some context.
So So I'm trying to make it so my employer doesn't hear this part, but I work for a company where pretty much I have my own little private office. So there's people during the workday. If it's slower at the end of the day, I can put on a movie, and I have my little tablet right there, and no one really comes into my office and like asks me anything or like checks on me.
Good.
So
I work from home, so I can do that all day long.
Yeah, that's the greatest part about working from home. You can just put on a movie all day. Like I was a kid that would watch, do homework in front of the TV. So my ADD brain is great for that.
Wonderful. And what about you, Tim? Have you seen Michael Clayton before?
I hadn't seen either of these. I was really impressed by both of them, to be completely honest. I finished Michael Clayton about a half an hour ago.
Wow.
Yeah, so I'm coming in really fresh. Yeah, it does stay with you. It's like really terrific performances, and it's so tense throughout the entire movie, which I really love. I feel like a lot of times in modern movies today, like the tension is there, but it's there for the sake of being there. But like this, the whole way through, you're not exactly sure where each direction is going to go. And I found it really compelling watch. And then The Hunt, also another good movie, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah, no, it's I don't know how I came to this movie, and I'm thinking about it. I can't believe you still listen to theater, Chris. This would be a you movie to see in the theater. You just see everything. It's unbelievable.
Right. It was. I mean, it was post college, pre kids. So I saw.
So
I saw friggin' Fever Pitch in the theater. So
okay, wow, that's sad.
Get your hands on.
Yeah,
I've also seen Fever Pitch in the theaters. That was
Wait, who's the
We
lead
exist.
in that? Is Jimmy Fallon the lead in that, or am I making this up?
Jimmy Fallon and Drew Barrymore.
It was the brief time period where people wanted to have Jimmy Fallon be an actor.
Adapted from Nick Hornby's novel about soccer.
Yes,
but
okay.
about the Red Sox.
But yeah, I did not see this in the theater. This is one of those movies we were talking about this in sort of pre-show, whatever, about like cable movies. They just come on the TV and you just start watching them. I think this is one of them for me. I think it was on HBO or something, and I started watching. I was like, "What the hell is this?" It actually happened to me with a lot of movies, but this one, it is a type of film where you catch a single scene. I remember the scene. It's Tom Wilkinson in the Milwaukee jail or whatever, and Michael Clayton, George Clooney's there to sort of pick him up, and he starts doing that soliloquy, or whatever. And I was like, "Well, I gotta stay for this, right? Like, I have to."
Yes.
And right since then, I've probably seen this movie maybe 20 times. It's definitely one of my favorite films from that decade, without a doubt, which is a little bit bizarre. I think you mentioned this already, Chris. It is not a film, a grandiose film. It's just not. But there's something about it, the way that it clicks, the performances, everything, where it definitely becomes more than the sum of its parts, and has, especially over the last, I would say, 5 years, become, oh wow, this is a special film from that decade that we kind of slept on when it came out. And it was definitely slept on, because when you look at like sort of the background of this movie and stuff, the way that it was marketed, the way that they talked about it, and I remember this, and I remember sort of the press around it. It's kind of a legal thriller, right? It's supposed to be a legal thriller. Is it a legal thriller? Would you guys call it a legal thriller? Would you call it?
I guess that would be like the best, really on Wikipedia when you pull it up, it says legal thriller immediately.
It just doesn't. I think we're so trained with like Pelican Brief and all the Grisham stuff that like it doesn't really have that style at all to it. Sure, it's about legal issues and it's definitely a thriller, but it's way more noir-y. And like, there's so much more going on here that when I saw it, the last thing I thought about was like, oh, this is about law. Right, because it's really about like a fixer and a down and out guy. I don't know. What did you guys react to immediately when you saw it? Because you both saw it for the first time. Like, what stood out to you as being maybe a little bit different than a normal legal thriller that you've seen before?
Well, I mean, as terms of legal thriller, it doesn't take place in any like courtroom, really. I mean, like the only really scenes of them like being like in a deposition is Tom Wilkinson stripping naked. But other than that, it didn't really say, like you said. I guess thriller just in general more like it, where like the opening code of the movie is the car being blown up, and you're immediately get sucked in. And you're like, what is going on right here?
I think it's really well paced in terms of, because it's like relentless, but then there's these points in like the middle where he's at like his family's party, and where he bumps into his brother again. Like, you just get to unravel more of the character and why he is the way he is. And I think it really works in like the benefit of this, because like everybody's kind of a scumbag in this industry, you know what I mean? Like deposition, big company, right? Like on paper they're not super likable people, but he gives such George Clooney is just always magnetic and likable. That's just his charm. And like just being able to learn more about the character while always keeping the tension up, because you have to deal with this bar situation on the other side too, getting the money for that, I think really allowed us to like explore the character a little more in a different sense than like a Grisham novel or anything like that, where it's usually through like a romantic angle or something like that, where you're exploring a character. So I thought that was different, and like just like the pacing of it, and like I felt like it was like really well edited, and like the script was fantastic too.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think someone said in a review, it's like a screenwriter's movie. It definitely sort of feels that way. Chris, where did this idea come from?
Yeah, so Tony Gilroy, kind of a not very well-known name, but he had kind of been a lifer in the industry. Parents were in business, so nepotism's a factor. He gets his foot in the door by writing the screenplay, again, basically just like because he wanted to get his foot in the door for The Cutting Edge back in 92.
Okay. Wait, is that the finger skating movie?
Yeah, the ice skating romance.
Oh, my Lord.
So memorable.
Yeah. I mean, it ended up having a sequel 20 years later, but it's insane that you would have basically this, beginning of his career, and then he kind of dives headfirst into the world of thrillers and action movies. He's probably best known for writing all of the Bourne trilogy films. And then perhaps after that, after Michael Clayton, he's become very well known in certain circles because he did basically the cleanup work for Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, for Gareth Edwards after, Disney wanted tons of reshoots and rewritten scenes. And a film that we have already covered on the podcast, Dan, Nightcrawler, with Jake Gyllenhaal.
Yes.
It's a great movie.
Yes.
Amazing movie.
Also, just like one of those thrillers, right? That is obviously very suspenseful, but doesn't quite fit the mold of what we typically think a thriller to be, right? So what actually happened is one of the scripts that he was most known for in the 90s was actually The Devil's Advocate. And so that's what got him interested in the world of lawyers. It's a bad film, but it is very entertaining. And it kind of got him thinking more in the lines of like trying to combine that very archetypal lawyer movie from the 90s with the paranoia thrillers of the 70s. And he got really stuck on this. There's one scene in Devil's Advocate that is essentially kind of the jumping off point for Michael Clayton. A number of years later, he had been working on the script for nearly a decade before it came to fruition. And it was that opening scene as the monologue is playing from Tom Wilkinson's character in the background as voiceover, and you slowly have a tracking shot into the room full of, hundreds of lawyers feverishly working into the middle of the night, trying to jam through a case, right? Some kind of settlement. And that's pretty much all we know. And he wanted to kind of sit with that idea combined with what he kind of saw was one of the more common tropes of those 70s paranoia thrillers is like having a hero that is inarguably a good person, except they have kind of gone past the point of possible redemption, right? Like they know that they've been doing bad stuff, but they have deep within them some kind of goodness that has been squandered, that has been diminished over the years, and they're trying to have one last shot, one last opportunity to redeem themselves, even though it's essentially, pretty depressing because they've already done a lifetime of shit.
Yeah, I mean, what do we make of Michael Clayton as a character? Is he? We define him as an anti-hero? Is that how we define him? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think so. In terms of like anti-hero, where like pretty much this guy isn't a good person at first, when he's talking about in the beginning where he's trying to get someone off who literally did like a hit and run right there. And that's your introduction to him, where it's just like, this is almost like the opening case for him, where it's just like, okay, this is just a little side adventure, but just immediately shows you like what kind of guy we're dealing with. He's not exactly helping the best of people right here. And his conscience probably isn't the greatest either. So
I feel like he's like an anti-hero, but in terms of especially like those 70s movies, I feel like he's on like the lighter side, like much closer to hero than like a lot of 70s thrillers, like anti-heroes. Like I'm thinking Travis from Taxi Driver, like anti-hero. It's like, well, he's on a different scale than Michael Clayton. And like George Clooney, I feel like was like the perfect casting for this because he's not too far gone where you need him to be like really extreme, but he gets to have that like smoothness that makes you like him, even if you feel like what he's doing isn't ethical. And then as he goes along working with Arthur, you discover that he has more of a heart and he's really just trying to find a way out of this position because he's been here too long and he's done with it. And his way out blew up in his face that he invested in.
There are two 70s thrillers that tend to come up a lot in Gilroy's interviews when talking about the inspiration for the film. And I mean, Taxi Driver is obviously a very common touch point, but he was thinking of this combination of both 3 Days of a Condor with Robert Redford and Point Blank with Lee Marvin. And so you have this character that essentially, like, you know, of course, there's empathy for Travis and a lot of those very kind of deep-seated, especially New York-based thriller films from the 70s. But in terms of, like, Michael Clayton, you've got someone that, on the one hand, is, like, literally getting away with, you know, getting off criminals, like you said, drunk drivers and people in power that need to stay in power by, you know, because they're a valuable client to the firm, etc. But then also somebody that's essentially a whistleblower, like in 3 Days of the Condor or The Insider, right? For a more modern example, you have somebody that is basically forced to reckon with, like, this point of no return. Like, if I don't blow the whistle on this thing, then I'm officially a bad guy. And I think that's where so much of the film's thrills come in, especially because, like what you guys had mentioned earlier, there's so much that is like unpredictable about where it's going to go, especially because he's surrounded with other supporting characters that are on both sides of it. You know, on one hand, you think that he's going to follow Tom Wilkinson into the maniac light, or he's going to, just do what Sidney Pollack tells him to, because, like we also mentioned earlier, he's very much in debt from gambling and his brother's restaurant, and you never know what turn it's going to take, and that's like the definition of a thriller.
What about this? You talking about that kind of makes me think about something, and obviously we're going to spoil the ending of the movie here because you should have seen it by now. So
it's on Netflix.
It's on Netflix. It's very popular on Netflix too. So you pointed out something to me, and sometimes I miss plot points, and I got to go back and rethink about something. Is Michael Clayton going to be a whistleblower unless they go directly after him and kind of try and kill him? Is he acting in a way where he's going to release something like all the copies that Arthur had made and sort of the Realm of Conquest sort of copy booklet that he made? Is he indicating that he's going to actually blow the whistle on these people, or isn't? I can't remember, if I'm being totally frank with you guys, because like it's kind of an interesting sort of thing. Does he become the hero because someone tries to kill him, or is he really making a conscious effort to be a good quote unquote moral person and expose these people? Because the reason I say this is the threat of going bankrupt and being threatened by the Irish, loan shark and his brother, who's an alcoholic and in a real bind, and kind of put him there. He's essentially paid off by the law firm as a bonus. So that problem's going away, right? Hopefully, to some degree. Mm-hmm. But I guess that's the big question. Like, how much of a hero is he here, do you guys think?
Well, I think in the end, when he's talking to Tilda Swinton, he literally says to her, like, "You stupid fuck! Like, why'd you try and kill me? I could have helped you."
Right. I could have been bought.
Oh man, it hits different, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. The more you think about it, where it's just like, okay, like, was this really the only reason? But I think his kid being in the movie, and like prominently in the movie at many points, is one reason of him trying to just do better for his kid. Where, like, he talks to his kid about the drug addict brother, where he's just like, "You're not going to be like this. I know you're going to have potential." I think that he doesn't want his kid to go down the same path that even he has gone. So I think that it's just trying. Pretty much, that's his conscience right there, his little kid.
I think he's like a man that's like accepted what he's done. He's not trying to be like remorseful for it, but he's trying to set the next chapter of his life up in a way that he can maybe live differently, which is why I like how the movie just kind of ends with him leaving right after they get arrested, and he's looking to get the next foot of his chapter and leaving that behind him. But I think, like, while he's in this mode, he's not necessarily trying to do the right thing. He's just trying to do the right thing for him. So it's more in like a selfish way than anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you bring up great points about both that moment in the cab where he's kind of like taking the, like, he just says $50, just drive, which could in so many other movies that could have just come off as like super like contrite and condescending, but in this case, because Clooney is the exact kind of guy for the job, Denzel almost had the role, by the way, which would have made it a very different film, I think.
Okay. Interesting.
A little more intense.
Yeah, exactly. He is kind of resigned to the fact that, like, his story's already been written except for this little coda, which he like immediately pulls himself out of. Like he could have hung around and gleefully watched, Tilda Swinton get cuffed and everything, but he's walking away because, like you said, his son, which is another like piece of the puzzle that could have easily come across as really, dumb and sappy, but Clooney plays it just right enough to make it feel like, yeah, he's not necessarily a quote good dad, but he's a dad that wishes that he was better, and he has this opportunity. And I mean, it's the horses, right? Going back to your point, Dan, about whether or not he's like trying to avoid getting killed, but like if he hadn't stepped out because the horses made him think about what his son was telling him regarding the original story, Realm and Conquest, and so because he like gave into some kind of impulse, after dealing with this drunk rich guy who basically just committed attempted vehicular manslaughter, whether or not he's going to keep going down this path. And it's just like one of those things where it's like one of the best things about movies is being able to put those kinds of really, at first randomly seeming symbols. And I mean, I don't think I got it until the third or fourth viewing, really. I definitely didn't get I remember my wife fell asleep during the film in the theater, and she woke up and she said, "Horses, explosions, really? Good night," and went back to sleep. And it's just like, on it. Right. So it's just, it's such a great balance of, layers and confusing, but then also just like really strong moral compass, but a realistic moral compass that we don't usually see in these kinds of legal thrillers that very much work in the binary of the noble defendant and the accused victim.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, so, this is definitely a movie. I think that now, like we said, this is both our first watch. I think this is going to be rewarding upon rewatch over and over again.
Yeah.
This is one thing that I had to study this at first. Like literally, I watched the movie and then I had to go on Wikipedia and review the plot to like remember the stuff, the horses and stuff like that. Like I definitely didn't catch it on my first watch. So I can't wait to watch this again.
Yeah, it's definitely, as someone who's been watching it, I don't know, I guess for the last decade, like a lot. It's every viewing just comes back and adds another layer to it. And it's funny you mentioned the horse scene, because that's what I wanted to bring up. And it was like, are we all in agreement that it, like, Chris, you think it 100% works, it sounds like.
Yeah.
I think it mostly works. What do Tim and Tom, what do you guys think? I mean, is that, the only thing I would say about it is it seems a little bit out of the tone of the movie to me. Just a little bit, just a hair.
Almost like mystical in a way. Where it's just
like magical realism, something like that, right? And what do you guys think? I mean, you think it works 100% or?
Well, like I said, I didn't really notice that at first on first watch. So it wasn't until like just reviewing back where it's like, okay, like I get that now. And now on rewatch, I'm gonna find that and be like, okay, I think it works personally. Once you notice it, at least.
Yeah. Now, like hearing it from you, because like I'm like trying to keep up with like the story as well, like missing up on those like little thematic things and like the placement of them. Like it was not completely noticeable. Like you guys are making great points here. When I watch this again, probably at some point this week, I'll end up just throwing this on again because I want to just like recapture this movie. I feel like I'll be able to at least pick that out a lot more. But like for right now, like I felt like at least for like a first time viewer watching it, it doesn't take you out of the movie, and it feels like it fits in it. But from a thematic standpoint, I have to rewatch it to be able to 100% confirm for you. How, if you're saying it took you 3 or 4 rewatches, to get those points.
A long time. I think the first couple times I saw it, I was kind of like Chris's wife. I was like, "Wait, what? I don't."
Yeah,
This is like, what's going on?
Right. And I mean, I think that one puzzle piece that helps make that scene work is with Tom Wilkinson having that phone call with the son and like showing his great interest in Realm and Conquest in contrast to how Michael's like barely paying attention, pretty much just not paying attention when his son is telling him about the novel while they're, in the car trying to get from point A to point B and figure out who's following him and all that stuff, or trying to find out where Arthur is, whatever. And like that kind of triangulation is really smart because it's definitely something that, I didn't catch the first maybe 2 or 3 times, and then it really hit me hard rewatching it the other day. Maybe because I'm a dad now and can like pick up on I pick up way more on like father-son relationships in movies. But I also was really caught up, I think, in this watch, just like being like, okay, so this kid's 15 years older, so he's probably like a 1 or 2L at a law school. So Henry Clayton, the movie, should come out in about.
No,
I'm hoping.
Henry Clayton, the miniseries. Come on, it's going to be a miniseries.
Give us the Legacy sequel.
Yes.
Here's a question. Okay, so it's Existential Thrillers is the cycle, right? And then the theme for this cycle. The thriller part of this movie, I gotta say, is just wonderful. I mean, specifically the scene where they kill Arthur is one of my favorite Hitman scenes ever in film. Ever. Because
Anthony Michael Hall. What the hell?
Yeah, it's so understated. It's so specific. And if I had to guess how this stuff actually goes down in the world, especially that corporate espionage, whatever world, that's to me how it would happen. It would be just so sudden. Yeah, it's so sudden and specific and drab.
Yeah.
There's nothing bombastic about it. They just, they shock him once, carry him into the bathroom, stick a needle in him, and he's dead 2 minutes later.
Yeah, it's one of those things on first watch with this where I really didn't know what happened at first. I was like, wait, he's dead? What? So I had to go back, I just put back 10, 15 seconds on Netflix or whatever just to be confirm, I just saw Tom Wilkinson die on screen.
Yeah.
Also, I appreciate that the hitmen were taken out of the Die Hard school of bad guys. You know what I mean? They just have that gruff, Eastern European look to them. I'm like, all right, yeah.
Ex-military,
The ex-military, of course, ex-military, and the way they talk. One of my favorite scenes in the movie, and this is why I love the writing so much, is the scene between Tilda Swinton and the main hitman guy, the lead guy, and she goes, take care of it. We work in absolutes. It's like that back and forth. It was like, oh man, this is so good. Yeah. What about would you guys agree that the thriller part of this is very strong pretty much throughout?
Yes, definitely. I mean, it's definitely the through line of Tom Wilkinson pretty much. Just at first I thought this was a movie of them just trying to get Tom Wilkinson in control and is this guy gonna fuck up everything? So this is just a great through line.
Yeah, I like how it shifts after Tom Wilkinson is murdered, and then it becomes way more about that death for the close of the movie versus at the beginning where you're like, are we going to get him under control? Are we going to be able to make sure that this class action lawsuit goes according to the plan of the company?
No, 100%. What about the existential part of this? So when we say existential, we'll find it a little bit. It's sort of questioning the world and questioning yourself and who in your place in the world and who you are. How do we feel this film sort of handles that, and does it sort of rise to that level that we could call existential?
I mean, I think, like I was saying earlier at the top of the show, it really does feel elevated from your average legal thriller because of that aspect to it. And I think it's pretty ingenious for Gilroy to kind of combine the essentials of a more modern legal thriller with that more paranoia feeling of the 70s, because that's essentially what I feel like was missing for a lot of the 2000s was these kinds of, adult dramas, thrillers, whatever, that had some kind of weight to them that weren't just pigeonholed as Oscar bait. It was legitimately a surprise, that he got a screenplay nomination, deservedly so, and Swinton ended up winning the statue, and yet it feels just on the edge, tight wire act between genre piece and character study. And so I think it's definitely there. I think it would be hard pressed to not be able to see that. But I do think, like we've mentioned a few times now, it's something that isn't necessarily apparent until you do the rewatches, until you really, see that journey of Michael's character.
Well, I think that's what helps this movie age really well too, though, is because you can watch it again and again and pick up on new things. I find that essential for any kind of rewatchable movie, is that you're going to spend the 2 hours watching this movie again, and you're going to come away with more and more from it than you did on your first viewing. I basically finished this movie and I was like, I think I need to rewatch this movie again. Like, I feel like I'm going to pick up on a little bit more if I watch it again.
Yeah, I was almost tempted to watch it a second time before we recorded. But this is one of those movies that, like, legal thrillers, you know, sometimes are very straightforward, where it's just like, this guy is clearly a piece of shit, and this guy's, you know, like the hero or whatever. Like, I'm trying to think, like, presumed innocence or something like that, where it seems kind of straightforward from a little bit. But this movie really lets his characters breathe and, you know, just like talk about stuff, right, whether Tom Wilkinson was crazy or not. And it really gets in that moral ambiguity. Can't say that word right now.
Ambiguity.
Ambiguity. That's what it is. So yeah, exactly. But you know, especially the scenes with him and his son, where it's just, that's essentially a lot of the existential like parts of this movie. We're just talking about like, you know, this is where it's going to happen. Or even Tom Wilkinson, where it's just like, okay, yeah, he was crazy and stripped in a, you know, in the middle of a courtroom hearing, but what if he was right? What if you know, we're doing this wrong?
And he was right. He came across as crazy, but he's right. It's like, you know, I guess is that Shakespearean where the fool is right or something? Right. You're an English teacher, Chris. You should know, right?
Yeah, no, it's arguably like part of Greek tragedy too, right? That kind of like the realization that comes too late, and so it still begets tragedy. And I mean, that's another thing, is like Gilroy's having his cake and eat it too, because you get to see, you know, unfortunately Arthur dies, but Michael gets to walk away at the end. So it's really balanced pretty beautifully. And I think that if there's one piece we haven't really hit on yet, it's this notion that you have very different kind of acting styles happening throughout the film that add to that balance. And it also adds to that feeling where it like almost you're wondering when things are going to spin out of control, that unpredictability factor. Like Gilroy talked about to the Seattle Times back when the film came out about how Wilkinson is one of those kind of very traditional character actors that just like, give me the script, let me learn lines, and then I'll go into it. And he can like blow you away with the right part. Whereas Tilda Swinton is more kind of like workhorse background knowledge. Like a lot of those shots of her like getting dressed or like sniffing her armpits, like that's actually not in the script. It's edited in after the fact because she wanted to do these kinds of things to get in the head of this character. So you've got a really kind of widespread. And then Clooney is probably somewhere in the middle. Like I've seen some criticisms where it's like, oh yeah, he's kind of doing what he always does, is just like the cool-headed guy where he's pained but isn't going to let anybody see it. But I don't know. I think I've never really loved Clooney as an actor until I've watched this movie a few times, where it's like, it seems like he's hitting all those beats with the right amount of sincerity, but never being treacly and everything.
Also, what I really liked about this with the Tilda Swinton introduction, it was a good point to bring up there. One of the things I noticed, because like I'm watching her character and her repeating like the lines that she's going to put in this deposition or whatever the thing they were recording, and you're wondering, okay, is she recording this to come like is this because she's weighing with the morals of what she's going to have to discuss, or is she just trying to make sure she's as sharp as she can be? And as you learn, she's very ruthless and has no issues there, but I like how it sets that up where you're not exactly sure where she's going to land in that term, because that's oftentimes something that they'll put in movies. So it's a nice little misdirection of like introducing that character, I felt like.
Yeah, I love how they pretty much introduced Tilda in general, where the first thing you see is her just like sweating in the bathroom. But then also the scene you were just talking about of her rehearsing a scene over and over again, it reminded me a lot of like Elizabeth Holmes type of person, where it's just like, like the pharmaceutical like CEO or whatever, where just over and over and over again, we could see that like almost is this what Tilda is doing herself before? Like, did Tony Gilroy just like shoot the camera while she was rehearsing practically?
Yeah, it seems like it. It's funny you mentioned Clooney, Chris, because I just watched Peacemaker from 1998. Me and Bob watched it as a fun
okay, so not the DC show.
Yeah, no. And he does his normal thing in that, but it's so different, right? Like George Clooney's normal shtick is like charming, funny, cocky. Here, it's very flat. And you feel a lot of that energy that he brings out in a movie like Peacemaker in his smile. That's all underneath now in Michael Clayton. it still might be there, but it sort of bubbles up here and there, but it's like a huge undercurrent. And that's like the whole movie, right? It's like, it's a textbook kind of thriller on some level, but it's the emotional and the emotional arc and the existential undercurrent, like you guys have been saying, that really brings it to another level and makes it, I would say, like a classic film of that time period. Let's talk about our chaser film. This one's going to be a little bit tough. The Hunt, 2012 Danish drama from Thomas Vinterberg. How do we want to start this one out, Chris?
Can I start? Because I went in completely blind.
Oh,
I apologize. I was like, what did you sign us up into here? Why is this about pedophilia? What is going on here? Like, I had no idea what I was. It's like a movie, The Hunt. I'm like, okay, I assume like he gets misinterpreted, and then he spends the second half of the movie getting chased. And
yes.
While I was wrong on that front,
I mean, metaphorically, you're right. Yeah.
We'll get to the ending, but I really appreciated how like very grounded and like real it felt. It felt so like this is what would happen in a small German or Danish town wherever it's taking place. And I ended up really appreciating. I had to take some pause breaks in there where I was just like, okay, I need a minute just to get my thoughts here for a moment, because it's
intense film.
It's very intense with like the most serious subject matter you can have in that kind of a drama. But it was a really powerful movie, really well acted, enough humor in there too to keep it like the levity as well, which is something I appreciate in a movie like that, because if it was just completely straight the entire way through, it would have been a much tougher watch. And that's where I wanted to start. Was just like, I went in blind. I would recommend not going into The Hunt blind. That would be my recommendation.
Look up what this movie is.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because this has been popping up on my radar for a decade, and I'd never seen it before. And I have always avoided it because of the subject matter. I knew the subject matter. I was like, I'm not ready for it. Not ready for it. And now having to see it, I should have watched this a long time ago. I don't know about Chris. Did you see this when it came out?
I saw it on video.
Okay.
And only because my wife is a big Thomas Vinterberg fan.
Yeah. Okay.
So my wife took Danish in college and saw The Celebration in college. Are you guys familiar with Vinterberg's other films?
I don't think I've seen any of the other ones.
I haven't seen any of the other ones.
Okay. So, I mean, it's interesting now in 2022 because he's now an Oscar winner for Best International Feature. He won for another movie with Mads Mikkelsen.
It's on my watch list, another round.
It's so good. And but The Celebration is how I got introduced to him, which is a movie where it's not too much of a spoiler since it happens in the first 30 minutes. And again, it's a movie from the 90s. So pretty old now, where essentially a family secret of pedophilia comes out into the open during a family reunion celebration. And so essentially this film, The Hunt, is a reaction or a follow-up in spirit to that film. And I do have to take off, and I know that's very suspicious timing, especially because I'm a teacher. And
why don't you want to talk about pedophilia? I couldn't understand that at all.
But I think after having seen him win for another round, and Mads Mikkelsen's now an international star, and we go back to this film 10-year anniversary, and it proves to us that cancel culture is real, right?
Oh no!
Okay, I'm gonna go. I gotta go.
Thanks for leaving us with that one.
Yeah, landed on a great note.
Enjoy your rest of the conversation. I can't wait to hear what you guys thought about it. But it's a very effective movie, but it gives me a stomachache. Bye-bye.
All right, see you, Chris. Thank you. Okay, so you guys brought up a good point about how real it feels, right? So Vinterberg was it started Dogma 95, which was a Danish film movement with Lars von Trier, right? And so that was all about taking cinema out of the CGI, out of the studio system, making it super indie, super straightforward. It had a whole set of rules to it, right? So I think that translates here. It didn't. I think the other thing too that what you guys were talking about, this is all based on true stories. This entire film, and he says in multiple interviews that he had to water it down. how severe the reaction was among the local townspeople, how much the children were manipulated in what they were saying about being sexually abused. They were lying, right? And they basically just says, yeah, I kind of had to water this whole thing down because it's way, way worse in reality. I mean, when you hear that, it's like, oh my God, right?
This movie could have gone off the rails very fast. That was one of the first things I was thinking about. Yeah. So it's great that they focus on the Mads character, from the beginning, that he's pretty much just like the protagonist in the frame of view. Because, I don't think I want to watch the version of this movie where you're not sure the whole entire time if Mads is innocent or not. Because
yes, true.
With that little little nugget right there, it would just be even more sickly, more disturbing. And then you can almost imagine a shitty, schlocky version where at the end of the movie you find out the twist that Mads actually did it or something. And it's
I was very scared that was going to happen when I seen it. I was like, oh no.
Listen, I'm going to come out as anti-pedophilia. I'm not personally not a fan. I'd actually call it one of the sickest crimes a human could ever commit.
Yeah,
I think you're right. If they tried to do, you can't do it with a crime like that. It's not, the audience will not recept to the movie well. And what they ended up doing with the ending, which we don't have to discuss this moment, I think it works way more effectively about the entire theme and message of the movie versus, some alternate ending where it's like, no, he actually did it. I was actually not to spoil the ending, but when they're at that cabin and he picks up, what's her name? Clara again, to cross the thing. I was like, oh God, why are you can't never touch that girl again. Why are you even doing that? And that's when I started shaking when they went on the hunt. I was like, oh, okay. Is he going to die here? Cause somebody saw him carrying her again. And the thought crosses their mind again. And then the ending itself, with the gunshot. And then in the thing, I was talking with Tommy about it. So let me ask you, Dan, who do you think is the shooter? Do you think there's any specific shooter in mind, or do you think it's more just a message?
I think it's more. I view it as more a message. But if you had to sort of, if I had to be a detective and think who it was, I would say Clara's brother, the older brother.
That's who I thought.
Yeah, because there's the way that they set up the sort of lead up to her making the accusation, where he's playing with his friend on the iPad and they're watching pornography and they show it to Clara and they say, rod in Danish or whatever. And that's what she ends up saying to the teacher. There's a setup there that I don't know if there's ever really the payoff that he might have been, or his friend have been, the source of her sort of disturbance, if you will. Mm-hmm. But there's also the scene that comes to mind is that they're playing with the nativity scene, I think, or something like that. And he starts crying. And then she walks out into the snow. Do you guys remember that scene?
Yes.
I guess I didn't pick up on what that was all about. I was linking that back to the iPad scene or whatever. I don't know. What did you guys think about that?
So my interpretation, this might be more of a hot take, but I think I might have been honestly just Mads' PTSD or imagination right there. That's my interpretation. So I think that either way to interpret the ending, I think that pretty much what it shows that Mads' life is never going to be normal again, and that he is just personally just so racked with literally entering a grocery store and getting the living shit kicked out of him. He's never going to be normal again. He's never. So I personally think the bullet was just him imagining, because he's in this situation where that could have happened easily. And so I think, all in his head.
I felt when when he's giving the gun to the son at the lodge, right at the beginning of the ending, and he looks around and Theo's not paying attention to him, and then the brother was kind of paying attention to him, but the son that he was looking at him kind of suspiciously. I think it's kind of a mix, and I think it was more to just send the message, and they did the right thing of not exposing who the shooter was, because then you can just have these open-ended discussions about it, think about it. But I think everybody knows the message is clear, is that the target will always be on his back, no matter what, no matter how innocent he was proven, and that people have accepted him back into the community. That still doesn't go away from people, the fact that he was accused of pedophilia. It just,
there's always going to be someone. Yeah, there's always gonna be someone out there that's just like I think the court system was wrong. You definitely did it. Mads did an interview in like 2012, apparently, with Collider, where on the ending, where pretty much he said that pretty much this guy can't stay there. It doesn't matter how much they try to accept him; they'll never be able to fully accept him. Like that's always going to be lingering in the back of their head. Like remember when he was accused of this thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the main message of the movie to me is a very, very cynical one and a scary one. And it's one where I find it interesting. And of course, Chris drops the bomb when he leaves about cancel culture and woke culture and all that kind of stuff. But I do find it very fascinating that this movie came out before all of that. Right. So this came out in 2012. The Me Too movement wasn't really taking off until about 2015, 2016-ish. And then cancel culture, whatever you want to call it, kind of paralleled that in the last half of the 2010s into now, of course. I mean, it's so fascinating to me that like this guy, Vinterberg was thinking about this. And, one of his main theses about the film is essentially that like ideas can be passed like a virus, essentially, especially socially. And we would call those like memes or something like that. But this is a little bit different than a meme, right? This is, an accusation that is so serious and so severe that you see the reactions of the townspeople. And I think the specific thing you guys brought up is that the grocery scene, none of those guys know him, right? They've never probably maybe seen him once or twice or something. It is a small town, but they don't really know him. And to be so viscerally violent and mean based on something that you heard through the grapevine. I mean, that to me is like such an indictment of all of social media, right? On some level that like, if a rumor gets out the door, what's the old line? The truth circles the globe by the time the truth gets out the front door. It's kind of like that idea. I mean, what do you guys make of that sort of criticism that he has or sort of viewpoint?
Well, there's one thing about the movie that almost is kind of frustrating, but in a realistic way, that you almost think that the movie could be easily solved with like a simple communication, which you try to do with the father. But, with the taboo nature of the accusation and how shocking and like visceral that is, you understand why like no one's giving him a fucking chance to explain himself. Just like, fuck you, you're a piece of shit. Get the fuck out of my life. And it's just kind of like scary just how like, it's like his best friend, and his best friend won't even like sit down to talk to him about it. And literally everyone else in this town is pretty much just like he's a pariah at that point.
Yeah, my one thing the entire time was like, after he got out, I was like, why are you staying in this town, man? Just you gotta move. I know you grew up here, but it's over. It's over. You're done. You can't live there. Like, if that's what Mad's point was. I think that was like, they did a really good job of establishing his character build up too, that he had friends, that he was like a part of the community, that he was good with the kids. But they also like one of the early scenes is him like helping a 5-year-old wipe himself, right? Like it puts those little things of like, he was probably a little too close with the children, for people to be like, okay, yeah, this does make sense. Like that he did this. And and when you have a 5-year-old making an accusation like that, they don't understand the severity of those claims. And I thought the other underlying thing was, like the brother may have influenced her decision, but she had like a crush on him because her parents were always fighting. They weren't really giving her the attention she needed. Yeah. He was always there for her, helping her walk her home. And she tries to give him the kiss and the note. And he's like, hey, listen, you can't do that. Can't kiss people like that. Why don't you go give this to one of the other boys in the class, And like, that's kind of where her anger festers up, because the one person in her life that's giving her attention that she so needs rejects her. And then when she sees that note of like the pornography, she gets the idea in her head to just kind of shoot it back at him, but doesn't realize how severe that accusation is. And then the way that the other teacher is just like totally believes her the entire way through. And it's like a weird line of like, how can you really believe everybody all the way through unless you've heard the other person's side of the story?
Yeah, I mean, in this case, and I think based on, what's funny about this movie is, not funny, I should say, but probably sad, is that, like I kind of stated up front, a psychologist brought these case files to Winterberg long before he made the movie and said, hey, you got to make a movie about this. because it was such a widespread issue of false accusations and shared false memories that was happening with children about sexual abuse. And a lot of people were getting hurt, including essentially the victims. You know, you think of Clara in this movie, you know, like she's also a victim in this too, because she's a kid, right? And like you said, she doesn't know what she's doing. She doesn't know that what she's saying could ruin a man's life, but she did it. And like, how does she interpret what's happening? I mean, think of the scenes where Marcus, Lucas's brother, goes over to their house and starts talking to them, and then like, you know, erupts with anger and spits in her face, Clara's face. How is she supposed to process that? Or in the church where Lucas and his best friend, her father, get into a huge fight in front of the entire village. You know, so it's like there's victims all the way around here. It's not just Lucas, it's not just his best friend, but it's also Clara, who unfortunately made the false accusation. So is there a silver lining in any of this?
Not really. And it's tragic how like she tries to tell people like I made a stupid mistake, and they're telling no, you're just like misremembering or something like that. Like the brain's like being traumatic, and like things that like you can understand where the parents are coming from, but just she tries to tell people and try to make the situation great, but no one wants to listen to that part, unfortunately.
Could you guys see this? A lot of foreign films that do quite well. I'm thinking of another Danish film that did well called Brothers. There's a 2004 film that got remade into a 2009 film in the U.S. starring Tobey Maguire, Jake Gyllenhaal.
Oh yeah,
I remember that. So the American version sucked. I didn't like it. The Danish version is phenomenal and reminds me a lot of this movie, where it's very understated, but the emotion is just like a mountain. It's overwhelming, the intensity of it. Could you guys see this being like remade in the US? Could we do it here? I don't know if we could.
We couldn't do it well.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
I think it would be a failure.
I mean, there's definitely been like some like movies that have like touched that topic, but it's just very delicate, and you almost would think that America would like like make it like a little more like thrilling or something like that, or just like Hollywood it up a little bit, you know, and that wouldn't work for this.
I think the only closest one I could think of from an American standpoint that like focuses broadly on this subject is Spotlight, and it's not told from like the victim perspective, it's told from the reporter's perspective, so that way you're dealing with people processing emotions that they didn't have to face, rather than dealing with the people that directly have to face those emotions. So it's framed differently, and when you're put in like a journalistic standpoint and you have deadlines, and then like I remember at the end they had like the 9/11 thing that postponed the publishing of the expose, right? Like they're able to kind of put those traditional thriller tense moments, where this doesn't do that in the typical Hollywood way. It's tense all the way through, but it doesn't build that like it's not like a thriller at all. You know what I mean? It's just it's very tense, very stark, very real, very grounded, which I really appreciate, especially on a subject matter like this. If it ever got made here, it would be like some really small Sundance movie with like $1 million budget. It would never, no Hollywood studio would ever fund a film as real and dry as this.
You wouldn't see like the American equivalent would probably be like Brad Pitt or something like that, or in this, you know, some random indie actor.
It doesn't work out. I don't think it would really work outside of that Danish film system, like where it's that dogma movement, at least remnants of the dogma movement, where it's so understated it almost feels like documentary like, where it just there's so many scenes in it that I think emotionally are incredibly draining, but it's through the acting and the writing and just the filmmaking that they are able to create something like that. But I think you guys are right. Like, there's no way the major studio system in the United States would touch this with a 10,000-foot pole. Like, it's too controversial. It's too nuanced of filmmaking for them to do it, because they want to round off the edges and make something that's going to make money. And this one, despite the fact that, this thing was shot for like $4 million in Denmark, it did do quite well at the box office for an art film. It did $18 million worldwide. But like, in the United States, in the studio system, they would want to make it for $10 million and make $100 million, right? Which is just not going to happen for something like this.
I guess maybe with streaming, you have more things that would maybe take a risk on something like this, but I just don't see it. It's like they would change it from pedophilia to like child abuse. It would be, they would try to cut the message of it, because it's so taboo. And like I think the film does a really great point of illustrating too, like it's a different culture than the United States, but people reacting there to an accused pedophile is probably very similar to how in a small town an accused pedophile would be treated as well. And it shows that like the universal disgust for that act, it's very prominent. But like the U.S. film system wouldn't touch pedophilia like that. They'd have to frame it through a different lens to not have it be the central focus of the movie, where it's rather like what you're reporting on, like in Spotlight, which is the only one I can really think of off the top of my head that like covers it pretty in depth.
Yeah. The other thing I will mention is that like Vinterberg grew up in a commune in Denmark, and he talks about how, I think one of the reasons he made a celebration in this film is that he talks about this explicitly in some of the Cannes interviews that he did for this movie. Essentially that like he grew up in an environment where people were very open and they were naked often. And he was basically like, yeah, I grew up around like naked dudes all the time and it was never like an issue. And now I find myself in a society, still his society, but a broader society than he was in, where, any of that sort of openness with people is kind of, everything's closed off. And like one of his messages here is that because it's so closed off, it creates an environment where someone can be accused of something, and it's such a violent reaction that all rationality is thrown out the door, right? And you look at how this essentially was like an avalanche, right? She suggested something, said something, and then it was like boom, 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 dominoes. He never had a moment to say anything. Right. And I find ironic or strange about this is that the police end up being the saviors to him. Right. I don't know if that would happen in the United States.
Well, I feel like there's enough evidence though, where like the kids that were sort of in the room would be like, he took us in the basement to do it. And then they're like, well, he doesn't have a basement in his house. So I don't know exactly, like, which I found to be like kind of smart. And his one wealthy friend with like the dad that was the lawyer, like helping him get off of it. But it's also true, like, everybody loves to say, especially in the United States, oh, innocent until proven guilty. It's like, well, this man was found innocent and you're still not letting him shop at your store, and you're beating him up for trying to get pork chops.
Here.
Absolutely.
And in this case, it's like guilty before proven innocent, and even still, as the ending shows, no one's ever going to fully prove that he's fully innocent. So I'm glad the movie at least had some characters that like thought that he was innocent, because this would have been even more of a tough watch if literally everyone, including his son and like his like friend and stuff like that, were all just like written him off, and he was all by himself. Would have been depressing.
That might have been a little bit too dark, right? A little bit too severe. Awesome. Do you guys have any closing thoughts on Michael Clayton or The Hunt? Anything that comes to mind about the films?
Well, Michael Clayton, I'm definitely going to rewatch a lot. I can't say the same about The Hunt.
The Hunt's
that was
like Requiem for a Dream, one and done.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I've seen it, got it out of the way. I don't need to revisit feeling that depressed in a movie.
And it's not speaking on the quality of The Hunt. The Hunt is an excellent movie, but The Hunt is not exactly for the faint of heart, and it's not the easiest of watches. So just go into that knowing if you're looking for something very serious and very real. Michael Clayton, I feel like, is going to become a yearly staple of my rotation, where it's just going to, I'll watch it a couple times really intensely, but then I'm doing something around the house. Throw on Michael. Toss it on.
Love it. That's great. Question for you guys in your podcast. You've been doing it for like, what you said, 6 months. Has there been a film that one of you had not seen before that has become one of your favorite movies? Anything that surprised you, or anything that sort of like bowled you over?
Well, I would make fun of Tommy because he was like, Scream is one of my top 5 favorite movies, and I'd never seen it, and I just always thought of like Ghostface as like this silly little thing. And I really liked Scream watching it. So I was like, Tommy, I take back all my decade of shots on view about Scream. I would say like we just did Doctor Strangelove very recently, and it's one of those, I think, especially in like the political climate of right now, it's like, oh, all of this craziness existed in the 60s too. So we don't need to worry that it's something new or something relevant there. It's like those kind of refresher things. I've found a really newfound appreciation for E.T. because I haven't seen it in a decade plus or whatever when we covered that, and just like how marvelous that film is, and it's not put on it feels like it's faded from Spielberg's best list in like the modern day discussions and like from pop culture, because it's not a franchise or anything like that. But just like when you rediscover some of these films you haven't watched in 10 plus years, you can really find how great they are again.
No, 100%.
It's one of those things that's been really fun about the podcast of like pretty much just checking off like things on our book, pretty much just movie list. Where because of this podcast, I finally saw The Godfather for the first time, and obviously it's a fucking amazing movie, and I can't wait to rewatch that. One that I wasn't expecting to like as much was Legally Blonde, and because it was a movie that you always would see on like Comedy Central back in the day if you tune into cable, and you're like, whatever, but. The first watch, I thought, this is a very fun, charming movie. I could see myself throwing this on a Sunday when it's rainy and just, need something to kill time. So it's been fun, just discovering movies that like somehow I just never got around to.
Yeah, no, that movie's fantastic. Super like light and fun, but also like, kind of tight and well written. It's just very
very well written, and like a really strong character in the age of like boner comedies.
Yes, exactly.
Where you would expect more like wet t-shirts, and like there's the famous image of her in like the bunny costume, and if that's all you know the movie, you're like, oh, okay, it's one of those movies. It's like, no, she's like a determined, smart girl that won't take no for an answer and will put in the work to become what she wants to become.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome, guys. Thanks for being on our podcast. We really appreciate it. Where can people find you? Everywhere, right?
Yeah, so we're on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, trying to get the Gen Zs there. At Seen It
We tried
Pod.
TikTok and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, TikTok's not as prominent as our Twitter and Instagram. So we can find us at Seen It Pod, and we're available on Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, pretty much anywhere you can get your podcast. And so, thanks for having us. This is great.
Dan and Chris, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun and 2 great movie recommendations. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Appreciate it, guys. This has been Film Trace.